Okay, we're holding in Perek Mem Hey, Pasuk Hey. Okay, so Yosef told them not to be upset. Ki mechartem oisihena. And this mechartem oisihena that you sold me here in Pasuk Hey, Perek Mem Hey, Pasuk Hey, mechartem oisihena. Before we get to the Alte Otzva Licha Beinechem, I want to talk about that line. For the fact that you sold me here. That's a repeat of what it says in Pasuk Daled, Asher mechartem oisi mitzrayim. So Pasuk Daled and Pasuk Hey both say that the brothers were the one that sold Yosef to Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim and Hena. And this is a contradiction to what it says in Parashas Vayeshev, at the end of Perek Lamed Zayin, where it says, the last pasuk in Perek Lamed Zayin, V'hamidonim machru oisai el Mitzrayim. The brothers did not sell him to Mitzrayim. Rather, the Midonim did. They sold Yosef to the Yishmaelim, as it says in Pasuk of Zayin. We could assume, as I think it's Ibn Ezra, which says Yishmaelim and Midonim are the same thing. There's a pasuk in Shoftim that supports that, which is actually related to Yosef. But either way, the Achim were not the ones who sold Yosef to Mitzrayim. The Midonim were. Rather, they sold him to Yishmaelim. And here Yosef stresses, you sold me Mitzrayim and Mechartem Oisihena. So I think the answer is rooted in a pasuk in Mishlei, Perek Vav, pasuk Yud Tes, which is the final of a group of 6 things that Hashem hates, the 7th of which is disgusting to him, and the 7th one, the final one, is Mishaleach Midonim Bein Achim. Mishaleach Midonim Bein Achim. That means someone that puts quarrelsomeness among brothers. Modoin is a synonym for riv, for quarreling. And this is like the highest thing that Hashem hates, is someone who takes brothers and puts between them midonim. Okay, and so what's my answer? But soon we'll get back to other things in Perek Vav and Mishlei. I'll show you how they parallel the story of Yosef. The answer is that there are 2 ways to look at the sale of Yosef. Either it's the brothers that sold Yosef, and he says, Ani Yosef Achihem Asher mechartem oisihema, stressing that he's their brother. And there's another story in Parashas Vayeshev that the Midonim sold him to Mitzrayim. But really, that's a problem, because Midonim are not supposed to get between Achim. Now, of course, Midonim in Parashas Vayeshev means the people of Midon, which is the same as Midyon, many say, because Midon as a nation doesn't appear elsewhere. And similarly, in Mishlei, there are 2 words for quarrel, Midonim and Midyonim. But it's obviously, one is talking about quarrel and one's talking about the name of people. But I'm saying that the contradiction about who sold Yosef, it's coming to allude to, is that there's a possibility of quarrel coming between the brothers, and that's represented by the fact that the brothers did not sell Yosef, as it's presented in Parashas Vayeshev, and the way it's presented here, that Yosef is saying the brothers did sell him, is rectifying the fact that the Midonim, whose name alludes to fight, got between Yosef and his brothers. That's the assertion. Of course, this all has to be explained further. And just to be clear, in case it's not obvious, I'm not answering the question on a pshat level. On a pshat level, what people call pshat, or simple pshat, probably they would say, okay, yes, it's not even a question, because the brothers sold him to Mitzrayim. They didn't sell him to Mitzrayim. Well, they caused him to be sold to Mitzrayim because they sold him to Yishmaelim, which sold him to Mitzrayim. But I'm not answering the question on a pshat level. I'm not answering a pshat level. I'm asking, why would the pasuk set up this contradiction, this surface level contradiction? And my answer to that is that the pasuk wants to have this word midanim, which is the word for quarrel, and the thing that Hashem hates is that there should be quarrel between brothers, and it wants to set it up, juxtapose these two psukim, one that talks about the brothers selling him and one that talks about the midanim selling him, to make us think about the fact that there's brotherhood, and Yosef here is reasserting the brotherhood, and the way he reasserts the brotherhood is by focusing and stressing that the brothers sold him, a point that we're going to get back to soon, what that's all about. And the alternative to that is to look at it and say they didn't sell him, rather someone else sold him, and that represents the fact that there were midanim, there were quarrels between the brothers, and lo and behold, the name of the people that sent him were midanim. Okay, now in Perek Vav and Mishlei, before we get to the pshat over here, I want to just show you in Perek Vav and Mishlei how there are many parallels to the Yosef story. The Perek begins speaking to his son, and the whole Mishlei, or at least a lot of the beginning of Mishlei, is an address to a son. It's a father's chinuch to his son. And the Mishlei begins, Mishlei Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael. He references his father's name. So it's a chinuch to a son, and specifically it's a chinuch to a son who's destined to be learning how to be king. If we read Mishlei Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael, he's telling you his father's name, unlike his unlike Shir Hashir. This is a different reason why he does it. But in Mishlei it says Mishlei Shlomo ben David, because a lot of the beginning of Mishlei is the Musar of a father to a son, which tells us then that we should read it as the Musar of a father to a son, but not just any son, but a son who's training to become a king. Okay, that's a parenthetical note, which we'll get back to soon. So Mishlei Perek Vav begins to the son who made himself an orev, and what he should do. So if he took a guarantee, took responsibility for something, what he should do to absolve himself or to deal with the fact that he's responsible for something. And this pasuk in the Medrash, if I remember correctly, is dashing about Yehuda, who said, Ki avdecha arav es hanar. So he was the arav, and now he's stuck as the arav for Binyamin, and he has to do whatever it takes to appease Yosef. So that's the first 5 psukim of that parak. And then jumping ahead to Pasuk Yud Beis, talks about the Belial person who is, and the Pasuk Yudalid, Midanim Yishaleach, that's the Ksiv is Midanim, and the Kri is Midyanim. The two things mean the same thing. In Mishlei, sometimes you have the word Midanim, sometimes with Midyanim, and that parallels the nation that's sometimes called Midanim and sometimes Midyanim. And that person will be punished suddenly, okay? And then Pasuk Tezayin, Psukim Tezayin, through your test, the ones I was referencing before, the 6 things that Hashem hates, and the 7 that are, the 7th, which is disgusted by his nefesh, haughty eyes, a language of a false tongue, and murderous hands, etc., false testimony, and Mishaleach Midanim Bein Achim, that's the worst. To break up brothers. Okay. And then Pasuk Chav addresses the Ben and tells him how to follow the mitzvahs of his father to protect him from the Eshes Ra, the Isha Zaina, etc. That brings us into Perek Zayin, and these Perek Zayin and likewise Perek Tes, which is the warning to the son to avoid the Isha Ra, are clearly parallel Yosef, who had to withstand the dangers, the lures of the seduction of the Isha Ra, of Eshes Potifar, in order to rise to the greatness, which is basically the education of Yosef. Yosef starts off as a nar, and Exil in other senses, and he has to become the Chacham, the Ben Chacham, about whom Parei says, Ein Navin v'Chacham kamoicha. And part of that is the trial of the Isha Ra. So that's where this parak in Mishlei brings us to the Yosef being protected and how to stay away from the Isha Ra. So that's what gets to what I was saying before, that Mishlei is chinuch for how to be a king, because as we've been discussing, Yehuda and Yosef are both contending for kingship, which of course foreshadows the two aspects, the two parts of the two kingdoms within Klal Yisrael, Malchus Beis David and Malchus Beis Yosef, and they're both groping towards Malchus and facing certain challenges that they have to, and certain shortcomings that they have in order to work themselves out and become roy to be a melech. Vayigash elav Yehuda is when Yehuda takes responsibility, as we discussed, and won't allow himself to see evil. That's Yehuda stepping up to be king. And paradoxically, when Yehuda offers to be king, how does he offer to be king? How does he take responsibility by offering to be a slave? And this is the key thing. The key thing about being a king is that you have to be an eved in order to be an effective king. That the downfall of the kingdom of Yehuda and the split between Yehuda and Yosef was because Rechavam didn't recognize this deep truth about being a king. If you want to be a king, you have to be an eved. This deep truth simultaneously does two things. It explains why Yosef had to be sold as an eved, and how Yosef's treatment at the hands of his brothers was not a contradiction to his destiny, but on the contrary, it was necessary for him to fulfill his destiny. Le'eved nimka Yosef, because in order to be a king, you have to be an eved. And Vayigash elav Yehuda, when Yehuda steps up and takes responsibility, which is the mark of a king, he takes responsibility by offering himself as an eved to secure the freedom of Binyamin. So that's when Yehuda and Yosef are both in line with each other. That's when Yehuda is essentially agreeing and giving his imprimatur to Yosef's experience of having been an Eved, and recognizing that having been an Eved is actually what makes Yosef worthy of being a king, so that the brothers unwittingly prepared Yosef for his kingship by making him into an Eved, by selling him. So that's Taka, the punchline here, that Yosef and the brothers now are united, and Yosef tells them, look, this is all necessary for me to be king. Point I'm making now is just that Mishlei, as an education for kings, has this education for the son of a king who's learning to be a king himself. And this Perek Vav, talks about what Yehuda has to do, who is the Arev, and what Yosef has to do, he has to avoid the Isha Ra. And there's a danger and the worst danger, the highest danger, the thing that most hated by Hashem, is when the brothers, in the allusion here, the brothers are the two kings, Yosef and Yehuda, and there was Medanim between them, which are the Medanim that sold Yosef to Mitzrayim. Really, we want to hear what Yosef says at the end, Ani Yosef Achichem asher mechatem Mitzrayim. Now, of course, again, this is all very nice and thematically. I hope you're able to follow without understanding it, because we still have to think about, well, what does this mean? Why is it so important for Yosef to say, you sold me, and not them? What's that all about? One more point I want to make about who did what is that here Yosef says to his brothers, Ani Yosef Achichem asher mechatem oisim Mitzrayim. And again, as we said, he says it twice in pasuk Hey. He reiterates that they sold him, but then he makes very clear that they didn't send him. He says mechatem oisim Mitzrayim, mechatem oisi hema. Because in the end of pasuk Hey, Shlochani Elokim, and again in pasuk Zayin, Vayishlacheni Elokim, and in pasuk Ches, even more stronger, Lo yatem shalachtem oisihena kihu Elokim. So you sold me, says Yosef. You sold me to Mitzrayim, to here, but it's not you that sent me; it's Hashem that sent me. So we have to understand what is the point of saying you sold me, and as we said, that's shifting the sale from the Medanim to the brothers. And in general, what's the point of Yosef saying, I am Yosef, your brother, that you sold to Mitzrayim? This is something we spoke about briefly last week, and I'm going to get back to that, what the deep meaning of that is. A very important, interesting meaning to that. What's his point? What's the point of him saying in Pasuk Daled, whom you sold to Mitzrayim? But what does it mean that he's telling them, you sold me, but you didn't send me? And how will this explain the insistence that it's them, not the Medanim? So we'll get back to this very soon, to the Shiluach and the Mecher. Before we get to that, which is the next few psukim, I want to comment on Al te'otzevu va'al yichar be'einechem. This is something also I mentioned briefly last week, but I just want to expand a little bit because it was rushing at the end. He says, Al te'otzevu va'al yichar be'einechem. Now there's another place where the brothers were misatzev and Yichar, and that's in Parshas Vayishlach, Perek Lamed Daled, when they heard about what happened to Dinah. Perek Lamed Daled pasuk Zayin, they came from the field Kisham Vayisatzevu ha'anoshim vayichar lehem ma'od. So here Yosef is telling them, Al ti'atzavu v'alicha beinechem. So the first thing, as we mentioned last week, is that this is the source for the Medrash of Chazal, that the brothers in this meeting with Yosef threatened that they could destroy the whole Mitzrayim just as they destroyed Shechem. They said, we know we wiped out a whole big city, we can do that here as well. So Yosef is telling them, take it easy. We're not going to do that. Okay. But there's also another meaning here, which is as follows. In the story of Shechem, in Perek Lamed Daled, where it says that the brothers answered Shechem, Hamor and Shechem, and they answered b'mirma. Okay, so we all know what the mirma was. They waited for them to do the milah, and then the third day they went and wiped out the city. Yaakov gets upset. He says, "What have you done?" Achartem oisi. Now that tells us that Yaakov did not expect Shimon and Levi to wipe out the city of Shechem. So how did Yaakov understand why they were telling the people of Shechem to do milah? He didn't know that it was a mirma, and there was a plot to wipe them out. Because when that happened, he got angry at Shimon and Levi. So he didn't think it was a mirma. What did he think? The answer is he took it at face value. He thought this makes a lot of sense. If they were willing to do milah, then we are willing to become one nation. Vayinu la'am echad, which is a major statement. We don't have a need. Shimon and Levi told the people of Shechem, we don't have a need to be a distinct nation. We are willing to be one nation with the Yoshev Haaretz, with the Canaanites, the natives, as long as they do milah. Okay, and Yaakov agreed to that. Where did Yosef stand on this matter? Yosef also agreed to that. How do we know? Because the pasuk says, Perek Lamed Daled pasuk Zayin, and there's an extra word in this pasuk. Uvnei Yaakov ba'u min hasada kisham'am, vayis'atzevu ha'anoshim vayicha lahem ma'od. That word ha'anoshim is extra, because it could say Bnei Yaakov came from the field kisham'am, vayis'atzevu vayicha lahem. But the word anoshim is extra, and that word anoshim is an important word because the Rashi, I forgot where, Erchinu B'chayris, says, maybe it's someplace else, maybe it's in Nazir, I don't remember, says that the source that bar mitzvah, that someone's called an ish when he's 13, is because the pasuk says vayis'atzvu ha'anoshim, and no, it says vayichu Shimon v'Levi ish charboy, and you make a cheshbon, Levi was at that time 13 years old. So you see that you're called an ish when you're 13. Okay, so now Yosef then was not yet 13 at that time. So when the pasuk says vayis'atzevu ha'anoshim vayicha lahem ma'od, it means the bar mitzvah bachrim from Levi and up, they got upset about it. Yosef did not get so upset about it. Aha! So he doesn't think it's the end of the world. What does he think? He thinks, as we said, as Yaakov thinks, that it's not the end of the world. We can intermarry with them, but there's one condition: they have to do milah. So basically, we have this old machlokes between Yosef and the brothers, whether we can mix with the other nations or not. Forget about Yaakov for now. Let's just think about Yosef. And Yosef's destiny was to, in fact, become one with the Mitzri nation. We spoke about this at length in when Paro said to Yosef, "Atoti al beisi val picho yishak kol ami," and the Navi says, "Lu ami shemei ali." There's this irony. Whose nation are we? We're supposed to be the nation of Hashem. We're not supposed to be the nation of Paro. But Yosef takes the bait, and he accepts that he's part of the nation of Mitzrayim, and that's what we get in the end of Yeshaya Perek Yutes, Baruch Ami Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is supposed to be Ami of Hashem. They're not supposed to be Ami of Paro. Basically, this whole question of what defines the Am of Hashem, and whether the Mitzrayim could be part of it or not. Yosef thinks they could, and Yosef's life ends up being a life of in the highest, in deep in the Mitzri society, and of course Yosef, according to the Medrash, gets the Mitzrayim to be mal. And furthermore, in this pasuk Daled, in Perek Mem Hey, where he tells his brothers to approach him, the Medrash says he showed them the milah. So basically, Yosef is here being vindicated. Here he's telling the brothers, Al te'atzu v'licha b'einechem. You have this old shita that's a terrible thing for the nation of Hashem to mix him with the other nations. And I always held it's not so bad as long as they do milah. And look, now you see that I'm right. Al te'atzu v'licha b'einechem, because you see Hashem's plan was that I should be here in Mitzrayim, and I should be one with them, and they should all do milah, and I'm still gemalit. So milah protects from, as long as it's milah, we can mix with the other nations. What that's all about, ein kan mekoymai. But this is an old machlekes. So this al te'atzu v'licha b'einechem is taking us back to the story of Shechem, and Yosef is essentially arguing that he's been vindicated. Okay, now let's go back to, let's read some more psukim here. At the end of pasuk hey. So we commented on al te'atzvu and al yichar and on mechartem oisi. We're going to get back to that soon. Ki lemechya shlachani Elokim lefnechem. So here we have the first mention of Hashem sending him. Remember before we spoke about the word mishaleach, we spoke about the word midonim, but the phrase in Mishlei is mishaleach midonim. So I want you to notice that here Yosef insists that Hashem sent 3 times. Shlachani Elokim, ve'shlachini Elokim lo yatem shlachtem oisi, and we had mishaleach midonim. And the business of being sent, that takes us all the way back to Pashas Vayeshev, where the beginning of this problem, where Yaakov says to Yosef, Hine achecha royim b'Shechem lecha ve'eshlochacho aleihem vayishalchehu me'emek Hebron. So Yosef has on a mission, ve'eshlochacho and vayishalchehu. And the question is, who's sending him on this mission? It seems like it's Yaakov, maybe the brothers intervene, and Yosef says, no, it's Hashem. And this, that it's Hashem doing the shiluach, appears also in Tehillim, Perek Kuf Hey. Start from pasuk Tezayin. Vayikor ra'av ala aretz kol matei lechem shofar. Hashem called a hunger. Sholach lefnehem ish. He, Hashem, sent a person before them. La'eved nimka Yosef. This is the pasuk we were talking about before. Yosef had to be sold as a slave in order to, I think I referenced this pasuk before, that he had to be sold as a slave in order to be refined, in order to become a king. He had to suffer first. Until the time came. So until the ace for the davar, he had to be refined, not by the suffering inflicted upon him by his brothers, but rather by the word of Hashem. It was really the word of Hashem that was guiding and directing his destiny. And again, we have Sholach Melech. So Hashem is sending Yosef before them in order for Yosef to become an Adain and a Moshel. And it's Hashem orchestrating things, so Hashem sends the Melech to free Yosef, the Moshel Amim. So there's an irony over here, that Hashem is really the one controlling everyone, and really it's all on behalf of Yosef, so even the king is in control of Hashem, and although he's a Moshel Amim, and the irony is complete by the fact that that the king actually gives kingship or rule, at least rule, Moshel Amim gives Mamshala to Yosef, and that's because it's not humans are doing things, it's really Hashem orchestrating things, and he can have the Melech do his bidding, and sometimes his bidding, the bidding of Hashem, will be that the Melech should appoint someone to be a Melech, sort of in his stead. And that's just a little bit of a parenthetical statement, but I think there's something going on in our parasha also, where Yosef says, I want you to send a message to my father, which is that I am the Adon of the whole Mitzrayim. It doesn't say anything about being second to Yosef. The message is, I am the master of Mitzrayim. That's how Yosef is presenting himself. He controls Mitzrayim. And maybe at least effectively he does. And that's the irony that's happening over there in Perek Hey, which is that Paro is installing someone who has full power, even though he's the Melech, because really it's Hashem controlling who should really be Melech, because that's the whole test over here, is who's right to be Melech and how they become Melech. Okay, but my point was just that there's another word, Sholach. There's a point over here that Hashem is sending. So now let's get back to the question I asked before. Why does Yosef tell them, you sold me to Mitzrayim, but he insists that it wasn't they who sent him, it was Hashem who sent him? What's the difference between who sent him and who sold him? So I think the pshat is pashut, that selling is an action. So he's saying you did the action of selling. And remember, there's that other sub-discussion, which is, well, actually who sold him. It's the Medanim that sold him. But we'll leave that aside for a moment. The question of who sold him is who did a certain action. So he's saying it was your action of selling me. Who sent him means whose agenda, whose kavan, whose intention is being fulfilled, is being executed by virtue of the fact that he's being sold to Mitzrayim. So those are two questions. So he's saying, look, you sold me here, not the Medanim, but you. But, and we'll explain that in a moment, but the purpose of the sale is defined not by your ideas, but rather by Hashem's idea, because Hashem was orchestrating things. He's the one who's doing the sending me on a mission. Now, how do those two things go together? Because what does it mean? Now we shall explain. What does it mean that the brothers sold Yosef? Why is it so important to Yosef to say that you are my brothers who sold, I am Yosef, your brother, whom you sold to Mitzrayim? Why is he stressing that? The answer is, and this we spoke briefly last week, because the fact that Yosef still considers them his brothers, is novel. You might think that they're no longer brothers because they didn't treat him as brothers treat their brother. Yosef is insisting that the fact that they sold him is also a function of their brotherhood, or brotherliness. How is that? Okay, so that's the argument here. That's the stress of it. He's saying, I am Yosef, your brother, that you sold to Mitzrayim. That means to say, the sale itself does not undermine our brotherhood, but rather it's a function of our brotherhood. Why? How could it be a function of a brotherhood if brothers don't sell brothers? The answer is that in the brotherhood that we're familiar with, the brotherhood that humans celebrate, we appreciate and live brotherhood by loving, by kindness. But since this is not you who are controlling events, because you're not the one you're not the people who are deciding what should be happening. It's Hashem who has a mission over here. Hashem is utilizing brotherhood for his ends. And for Hashem's ends are very interesting, because Hashem's ends have this feature of Atem chashavtem alei ra'ah, Elokim chashav alei tova. What humans think are bad could turn out to be good from God's perspective. That's what's interesting about Hashem's Hashem doing things. And since it's Hashem utilizing brotherhood for his ends, therefore he can utilize the fact that brothers have a relationship to each other that might cause them to sell each other. So in other words, why would you say that a brother who sells a brother shouldn't be considered a brother? Because we expect brothers to act a certain way to each other, because that's the function of brotherhood according to our understanding. The function of brotherhood is for brothers to love each other. And if they're not living up to the function of brotherhood according to our understanding, then we wouldn't consider them brothers. But what if Hashem is utilizing the fact that they're brothers for his ends? Then, since Hashem does things in wondrous ways, he could utilize brotherhood even though it's in conflict with the way humans understand brotherhood, and it's the opposite of the way humans understand brotherhood. So that's the two things that Yosef is saying go together. He's telling them, you sold me, and it's not the Medanim. And as we said before, that means there are no Medanim between these Achim. Our brotherhood is intact. How could brotherhood be intact if there was hatred instead of love? The answer is, says Yosef, I insist that even the fact that you sold me itself, I consider that a function of our brotherhood. How is that a function of brotherhood if that's beyond our understanding of how brothers should act to each other? The answer is because it's Hashem utilizing this brotherhood for his ends. And since Hashem is utilizing the brotherhood for his ends, he needs to find two people who are brothers, close to each other, not that they love each other. On the contrary, maybe he'll make them hate each other, but they're only hating each other because they're brothers. And therefore one will sell the other one. And therefore Hashem will use the institution of brotherhood to achieve his means. And by that metric, one brother will say to the other one, the fact that you sold me does not undermine our brotherhood. On the contrary, it's part of us being brothers, is that you sold me because Hashem is utilizing the fact that we're brothers and getting you to sell me in order to achieve his ends. Okay, now there's another shlichus. So this is why we have the whole stress on the shiluach, and this is why the Mishaleach Medonim Bein Achim parallels by Shalchini Elikim. Because if you understand the mission of Yosef as coming from Hashem, then if Hashem is the Mishaleach, then there are no Medonim between the Achim. Why? Because Hashem could utilize brotherhood in his wondrous ways, and that doesn't undermine their brotherhood, because it's Hashem sending them. But if it's human sending, and human concept of brotherhood is that brothers should love each other, then by that measure, by that perspective, the way the brothers treated Yosef puts medonim between the brothers. Okay, so that's the remez. The remez now is complete. The medonim between the brothers is there in place of the brothers selling Yosef, and the Mishaleach medonim, the expression of Mishaleach, is parallels Vayishlachini Elikim, because once you understand that Hashem is utilizing brotherhood, then the brotherhood is not undermined by the hatred, and the medonim do not get between the achim. Beautiful. Okay, there's another shlichus, and that's in the mizmor that we've gone back to again and again regarding Yosef, mizmor Pei Beis, where it says va'ashalechehu Pei Aleph. Va'ashalechehu b'shrius libam yelchu b'me'atzeisehem. This is Hashem sending people off in the shrius slave who, instead of lu ami sheme'ali, which we mentioned before, when Pari offers Yosef apicha yishak kol ami, there's an irony over there, because we're not the am of Pari, we're the am of Hashem, and we should be listening to Hashem, but instead we don't. We listen to Pari, and v'ashacheu b'shrius libam. Okay, the shrius libam is doing what their heart desires. This takes us to Yirmiyah Perek Chav Gimel. Let's read this pasuk. Yirmiyah Perek Chav Gimel is, of course, the parak we keep on going back to about the difference between Nevi'im and dreams. And there in Pasuk Yud Zayin, it talks about those who say, Lemena'atzai, Diber Hashem, Shalom Yelochem. So people say to those who are Mena'atz Hashem, that Hashem says there will be Shalom for you. That's one problem. And people go in the shrius of their heart, and they say, evil won't befall you. Okay, so just a little bit of a pirush over here. The mena'atzim of Hashem are Parai, who say Mi Hashem, Asher Eshma B'Koiloi, and in Mizmor Pei Aleph, Mesani Hashem Yichach Hashuloi. And people say to the mena'atzim Shalom Yelachem, that's reference to Yosef, who said Elikim Ya'aneh Shloim Parai, and this is wrong. That's referring to the brothers who say no evil will befall us, and Alkin Ba'a Elenu Hara'a Hazais, as we discussed, as if they don't expect any evil to befall us, and when evil does befall them, they have to find an explanation for it because they think they're immune to evil happening to them. Okay, that's something we spoke about a lot. We're not going to go back into the sources for that. The next pasuk there in Yirmiyah is Mi Amad B'Soid Hashem V'Yeva Yishmas Dvarei. This we spoke about last week. Mi Hikshiv Dvarei V'Yishma. This is like the parallel pasuk there in Yirmiyah, which we spoke about last week. Mi Hu Ze Aravas Liba Lageshes Elai. Why do I call it a parallel pasuk? Because the next pasuk here in Perek Chav Gimel is Hine Sa'aras Hashem Chema Yotzah, and Sa'ar on the heads of Rishaim Lo Yoshev Af Hashem Ba'achris Hayomim Titzbeinu Bavina. And the same thing you have in Perek Lamed after Mihu Ze Aravas Liba Lagesh Selai. It says Hine Sa'aras Hashem Chema Yotzah Lo Yoshev Af Hashem Ba'achris Hayomim Titzbeinu Bavina. Okay. And here in Perek Chav Gimel, now I'm at the pasuk Chaf Aleph, a few psukim, the next pasuk after this, Achar Sayam Tizbonu Rabina, it says, Loi Shalachti es haneviim vehem ratzu. I didn't send them and they ran. Ve'im amdu b'soidi, because remember the pasuk before said that not everyone could stand in the side Hashem. Then v'yashmi'u devarai es ha'am hazeh, as ami, v'yishuvu midarkom hara mirei malaleim. So lo shalachti, I didn't send them. Instead, so these are not sent. Instead, v'ashar achehu b'shviyus libom. And if they're really in the sight of Hashem, and not anyone could be, mi amdu b'sod Hashem, then they should tell devarai es ami, that's lu ami shemei ali, v'yashmi'u devarai es devari, and take them from darkom hara mirei malaleim is instead of v'ashar achehu b'shviyus libom mirei mal, v'ashar achehu b'shviyus. They're supposed to go on drachai. Instead, they go in shvivos libam. Okay, fine. So, what's the meaning? The meaning is like this: that there in Yirmiyah it says ba'achves hayom tzbonu bavina, and as we spoke about this last week, this is the deep message of Yosef. Vigash elav Yehuda, he tries to come close, and Yosef says, no, it didn't work. Gishuna elai vayigashu, Hashem has to bring you close. Meaning to say, as the Navi says, mi amad b'soid Hashem, not anyone could just speak for Hashem, because if everyone could speak for Hashem, then everything would have been great. Meaning to say, there wouldn't have been Yosef ignoring Ami, Lu Ami Shemeali, and listening and speaking Shalom to Pare. There wouldn't have been the brothers saying, thinking that they could speak for Hashem and thinking that they're immune to Ra'ah, not realizing that they don't know Ra or Taiv. They're not good mafchinim between Ra and Taiv. Everything would have worked out perfectly. But in fact, it only works out ba'achves hayamim. Why? Because you need this process of what's called machshavos Hashem, and this process of Hashem bringing close who He chooses to bring close, because mihu ze'arav asliba legeshes elai. So this is the amazingly deep shtikut Torah that Yirmiyah is explaining the process of Galus and Geula, and basing it on the story of Yehuda and Yosef. And it goes again, just to say clearly. Both the brothers and Yosef share blame. Yosef shares blame for being committed to Shloim Pare and rejecting the concept that we're Ami of Hashem. The brothers who try to have Das Hashem ultimately are not capable of properly discerning Toiv from Ra, and they think like Sava Elechem Ra, and they don't understand the difference between Ra and Toiv. They think they do, but they don't. And all this is because of Mi Amad B'Sayid Hashem, or Mi Hu Za'ar Vasli, but we cannot approach Hashem. We need Him to bring us to Him, and the way He brings us to Him is by bringing us through this process of us messing up, doing evil, everyone in his way, Yosef in his way, Yehuda in his way. And then Ba'achas Hayom Tzbonu Nobina is when Geshuna Elai Vayigashu is when we finally understand that Hashem's deep plan, that He's making a king, right? The pasuk says, it's all about making kings. And now I want to end with, let's just say one word on the next pasuk, one nikud on the next pasuk, and we'll finish soon. Pasuk Vav, Kizesh Nasayim Hara'av B'Kerev Ha'aretz. It's already been 2 years of hunger. V'oid Chamesh Shanim Asher Ein Choresh V'Katzir. So let's talk about this Choresh V'Katzir at the end of Amos. The end of Amos, Perek Tes Pasuk Yud Beis, Hine Yomim Ba'im Ne'um Hashem V'Nigash Choresh V'Katzir. And this V'Nigash Choresh V'Katzir we've mentioned numerous times. This Vayigash, the Medrash connects to Yehuda and Yosef. Vayigash Elav Yehuda, and the Choresh and the Katzir are Yehuda and Yosef. But Yehuda reference that there's not going to be Choresh V'Katzir. And here it says Yomim Ba'im, and Yosef spoke about Shnasayim Hara'av and Chamesh Shanim. And there, what does it say in the end of Amos? V'shavti Yeshvus Ami Yisrael, etc. Because the point, as Yirmiyah says, the point of how do we survive the exile? How do we survive the Hestepanim? How do we earn this Acharas Hayom, this burden of Bavina? And how do we stay in tune with the machshavos of Hashem that are not known to us? That's what's being worked out through the story of Yehuda and Yosef. Nigash Choresh B'Katzir Vayigash Elav Yehuda, when Yosef says, in order to survive the exile of Mitzrayim, we need to be united. That is how we earn this Shavti es Shivus Ami Yisrael. Okay, and I just want to comment. It's interesting. Maybe we'll get to this next week. Well, actually, next week we're off, but just want to comment that this V'oid Chomesh Shanim is very interesting. How casually Yosef predicts the future and says, "Oh, by the way, there's a hunger for another 5 years," without explaining how he knows that. Just parenthetical. And with this, we will end. Take a look at Micha. Micha, in the end of Perek Aleph or Beis, I think. The end of Perek Beis of Micha, Perek Gimel starts Shimuna, Rosh Beis Yaakov, and we spoke about how that's referring to Yosef's dream to the brothers. It said Shimuna. And the last pasuk in Perek Beis talks about the king going in front of them. Vayavar Malcolm, their king goes before them, Hashem b'reisham, and Hashem is at their head. So there's the king and there's Hashem leading them. So Hashem is sending Yosef, right? And Yosef, who became king, was sent by Hashem. Remember those psukim in Tehillim where, ironically, Hashem controls the kings and he makes Yosef into the king. So their king, Hashem, goes in front of them. Their king, Yosef, goes in front of them. But it's really Hashem b'reisham because he's orchestrated by Hashem. It's really Hashem doing everything. So therefore, by Yosef going ahead of them, it's really Hashem going into them. And similarly, Ves Yehuda sholach lefanov goishna. So both Yosef and Yehuda, two contenders for the kingdom, go in front of Bnei Yisrael. Sholach lifneihem ish. And Ve'shalchini elikim lifneichem. And this is all Vayavar Malcolm lifneihem v'Hashem b'reisham. Because since it's Hashem orchestrating it, therefore the king that's going in front of them, whether it's Yosef or Yehuda, or it's both of them, because they're both kings, is really a representation of the Eitzah of Hashem, as that pasuk says. Okay, next week there will not be a shir. I will have the great tzchus of being in Eretz Yisrael, so we will resume Mitzvah in 2 weeks.